We're about to drop a new single on Spotify.
We're announcing our takeover as Vice President of the United States of America. We take the role. It's the first time in history an organization has become the Vice President of the United States of America. From the outside.
Trying to help the source. Yeah, we gotta reframe.
So. Yeah.
Is there gonna be a live video streaming this?
Yeah, so the live just started.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Naveed Shah. I'm the political director and an Army veteran of Common Defense. Today we're bringing folks from Common Defense, Breaking the Silence, which is a Israeli veterans group, as well as our friends at the National Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL, together to talk about why we need a permanent ceasefire right now. So without further ado, I'm going to begin our program. I would like to introduce Common Defense's Executive Director, Army veteran, Jose Vasquez.
Thanks, Naveed. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Vasquez. I'm the Executive Director of Common Defense. Thank you all for being here today as we unite veterans of both the U.S. military and Israeli Defense Forces to demand that President Biden and Congress use every tool at their disposal to end the horrific war in Gaza and bring about a lasting peace. I am deeply honored to stand alongside Nadav Wayman and Joel Carmel from Breaking the Silence and Hassan El Tayyab from Friends Committee on National Legislation. Common Defense is the largest veterans organization in the country, with nearly 300,000 members nationwide. Founded in 2016, we empower veterans to continue their service by fighting for a country where liberty and justice truly is for all. One of our longest running and most impactful campaigns has been our effort to end forever wars. And today, we're here to talk about a forever war that until recently has all too often been ignored by our leaders. In April 2022, I had the profound privilege of joining a delegation of veterans from Common Defense to Israel and the West Bank. Hosted by Breaking the Silence, we engaged with Israeli and Palestinian academics, journalists, and lawyers who courageously opposed the occupation. During our visit, we witnessed firsthand the occupation's devastating impact on everyday Palestinians and Israelis. We saw the resilience and hope of those working tirelessly for peace, despite the immense challenges they face. We listened to the stories of veterans who, like us, understand the heavy toll of war and the dehumanizing impacts of occupation. These conversations reinforced a shared desire for peace founded on firsthand knowledge of war's devastating costs. Nowhere is evil more clear than in Gaza today. Since October 7th, 2023, we have watched in horror as over 38,000 Palestinians, the vast majority of whom were civilians, have lost their lives. This brutal campaign has left Gaza in ruins and its people in despair. Today, we deliver a petition signed by more than 5,000 veterans and military families. This petition represents the collective voice of those who have served and deeply understand the true cost of war. We urge President Biden and Congress to take immediate action to halt the violence and address the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Our petition has 5 clear demands. First, President Biden must use all diplomatic means to pressure both Israel and Hamas to implement the immediate ceasefire proposal, including the permanent cessation of all hostilities and the safe return of all hostages being held in Gaza. Second, Congress should tie any future military aid to Israel to a clear demonstration of Israel's commitment to and respect for international law and the human rights of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and restore U.S. support for UNRWA. Third, the U.S. must ensure safe access to Gaza for humanitarian and media personnel, as well as the UN. Fourth, the U.S. must demand that Israel cease its practice of indefinitely holding Palestinian prisoners without a free and fair trial, including those in administrative detention, a practice which must be abolished immediately. Finally, the administration and Congress should promote a diplomatic approach to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East and prevent broader conflict. We hope that this partnership of Israeli and U.S. veterans standing together can send a powerful message. Peace is not only possible, but it is our duty to strive for it. We must reject the notion that war is inevitable and work tirelessly to build a future where peace and security are attainable for everyone. Thank you for your time, and thank you for standing with us in this crucial moment.
Thanks very much, Jose. Up next, we have Common Defense's own Janice Jameson, who is an Air Force veteran and Director of Special Projects. Janice?
Good morning, my name is Janice Jameson. I'm an Air Force veteran and former intelligence analyst and also the Director of Special Projects with Common Defense. Thank you all for being here to demand an immediate ceasefire and an end to the horrific war in Gaza. As a former intelligence analyst, I have a deep understanding of the meticulous planning that goes into targeting and bombing campaigns to prevent civilian casualties. It is clear that not only are efforts not being made to prevent such widespread destruction in Gaza, but it seems that civilian casualties are the point. Experts now say that this is the most destructive bombing campaign of the last century, surpassing even the horrors of the Second World War. Such destructive bombing campaigns go beyond targeted attacks. They are designed to annihilate an entire people. Given my military background, I also cannot help but to see the telltale impact of U.S. munitions and weapon systems in the devastation of Gaza. From the F-15 Eagle to the Hellfire missile to the Mark 84 bombs, the fingerprints of American-made weaponry are everywhere. These tools of war meant to defend are being used to destroy innocent lives and entire communities. An often ignored impact of this is the moral injury inflicted upon veterans and service members watching their government continue to send U.S. weapons and funding to support this military campaign. These scenes of destruction remind us of the horrors we witnessed in Iraq and Afghanistan. As one of our members and petition signers said, these are U.S. weapons being used to kill children and families. It might as well be our war. As a mother, I am profoundly dismayed by the high-tech brutality being targeted at families. More than 300,000 innocent people have lost their lives. These are not just statistics. These are human beings, families torn apart, dreams shattered, and futures obliterated. This indiscriminate bombing has created a humanitarian crisis of unimaginable proportions, and it must end now. Finally, as a Black woman, I feel compelled to address the role racism plays in this conflict. The mass slaughter in Gaza is not just a geopolitical issue, it is deeply rooted in systematic racism. The dehumanization of Palestinians, the portrayal of their lives as less than valuable, echoes the racial injustices we fight every day. We cannot ignore the racial dimension of this violence, and we must stand against it with all our might. We are here today, not just to protest, but to demand change. We are here to bear witness, to refuse to turn away from the atrocities, and to insist that our leaders do the same. Our collective voice is powerful, and it is our duty to use it to fight those who cannot fight for themselves. The struggle for peace and justice is long and arduous, but we must remain steadfast. Together, we can and will create a future where the rights and dignity of every human being are upheld. Thank you for your time, your presence, your commitment to justice. Let us continue this fight with unwavering determination and compassion.
Thanks very much, Janice. Powerful speech. Up next, folks, we have Hassan Al-Tayeb, who's the Director of the Middle East for FCNL.
Thank you so much. If only I directed the whole Middle East. Hello, everybody. I am honored to be here today with Common Defense and Breaking the Silence. Dear friends, I got the honor of traveling across the West Bank with Breaking the Silence in 2022, met some of their staff, just incredible people. Now, I'm not a vet. I do work for the Quakers, and we are pacifists by nature. But I did want to tell a few stories about some veterans in my family. My grandfather was a pilot, glider pilot in World War II. And also my cousin was a Air Force pilot for the Royal Jordanian Air Force. His name was Muath. His plane malfunctioned and crash landed in Syria, and he was captured and burned alive in a cage by ISIS. My dad was so angry, wanted revenge, but I knew that revenge on one group was not going to stop a cycle of violence, and that we needed to look at root causes like U.S. foreign intervention in Syria, in Iraq, to really get to the bottom of this. Tomorrow, Congress is set to give Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu one of the highest honors our government can give any foreign leader, a chance to address a joint session in Congress. And we're giving him this honor despite the fact that Bibi's government is facing international investigations for war crimes in Gaza and have used U.S. military aid and weapons to kill nearly 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including 15,000 children, decimating entire generations of Palestinian families. The Israeli government has demonstrated time and time again that it doesn't respond to finger-wagging or warnings or stern words, and U.S. policymakers need to do more to help end spiraling violence for the sake of Israelis, Palestinians, Americans, and global stability. With the time I have here today, I'd like to highlight voices of some people that really ought to be heard in this kind of way by U.S. lawmakers, but are not being heard in the halls of power. Earlier this year, I went to Israel across the West Bank for a 2-week trip as part of a delegation convened by Churches for Middle East Peace. Our trip included extensive visits with patriarchs, heads of churches, Christians, Jewish, Muslim leaders, human rights activists. We even met Mahmoud Abbas. He gave us tea and offered me a cigarette. I don't smoke. The stories they shared simultaneously broke my heart open and gave me inspiration to keep pressing for an end to this brutal war that's claimed the lives of tens of thousands of civilians on both sides. One of the most difficult things I witnessed was how children are being traumatized. I spent almost a week at the Ramallah Friends School, was at a loss for words trying to explain our government's actions. As a lobbyist, I'm used to talking quite a bit. I had a speech prepared, all ready to go, and I decided at the last moment that it was actually time for me to listen. I asked students, what do you want me to tell policymakers when I get back to DC? And one by one, they told me. They asked, why is the U.S. continuing to support what they see as a genocide by sending bombs and military assistance? Through tears, the third-grade cousin of the Ramallah Friends graduate, who remains paralyzed to this day after being shot in November in Vermont, he asked me, can you tell people in the U.S. to stop crimes of hate against Palestinians? And his teacher gave him a big hug. Lena, a 6th grade Palestinian student at the Ramallah Friends School, passed me a folded handwritten note after one of the assemblies, and it read, "Palestine is witnessing a genocide right now. A child is dying every 5 minutes. Gaza needs a break. The Palestinian people are desperate for a ceasefire." A few students thanked me for my advocacy, and for that I was humbled. But I knew I couldn't stop working for peace and an end to U.S. complicity. On my last day of the trip, I caught a shuttle with the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, through the Al-Lembi Bridge into Jordan. And during that ride, an UNRWA employee named Nisreen told us about her work in off hours to evacuate Gazan children. She showed me pictures of severe burns, amputated limbs, and these are disturbing images I'm not going to soon forget. In total, they've been able to evacuate 50 kids out of Gaza to Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Jordan, and elsewhere, all accompanied by a +1 adult and their siblings. And despite her being able to secure medical evacuation to a hospital in Florida, she explained that many families refuse to get treated in the U.S. out of fear. Let that sink in. They would rather take their chances in Gaza than come to the U.S. to get treatment. That's disgusting to me as an American. We tell them that they're good doctors, but they're too scared. I told Nisreen, "You are an incredible person, and the work that you're doing with UNRWA is God's work." And she said, "I'm doing it to not surrender to the fact that there is no justice." Later, we got back to the U.S., and what happened? 12 of the 13,000 individuals that work for UNRWA in the territory were accused of taking part in the October 7 attacks. And despite UNRWA firing the individuals, opening up a full investigation, the U.S. has paused all funding to the agency. And without these funds, Nisreen and other UNRWA staff aren't going to be able to serve Palestinians that are facing what the World Food Program is calling a full-blown famine. It's time for the U.S. to restore that funding and use all its leverage with Israel to increase humanitarian access. While we were in Ramallah, I spent a lot of time with the Carter Center, and they have an Israel-Palestine team out there. Great folks, and I just wanted to share some of the polling that they were able to find through Institute for Social and Economic Progress. They found a few data points that challenge mainstream narratives, including that the majority want elections in Palestine, they want a reformed PA, they want a secular democracy with freedom of religion, and support for a two-state solution is now upwards around 70%, almost a 40% jump since October 7. And I thought it was just eye-opening how aligned U.S. and Palestinian interests are right now. Also, according to one of the polls, Marwan Barghouti, the imprisoned Intifada leader, would beat Hamas, the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, with over 70% of the vote. You're not hearing that on CNN, though, unfortunately. And many have referred to him as the Palestine Nelson Mandela, though he's experiencing massive amounts of torture in Israeli prisons right now as we speak. Later, I met Marwan's wife, Fadwa Barghouti, who's renewing her international campaign to secure his release and the release of all Palestinian political prisoners. She told me, as a wife, I'd miss him, but if he's released to Gaza to help Palestine, I support it. And that's love. In addition to the devastating toll the war in Gaza has taken on Palestinian society, it was clear that from our conversations, that Israeli society is still reeling from the atrocious massacre of October 7 and hoping for the safe return of their friends and loved ones. More than 100 individuals still remain hostage. And in many ways, I see the U.S. government, as demonstrated here by Bibi Netanyahu's invitation, that the U.S. is amplifying the voices of some of the radical extreme right wing and ignoring large segments of Israeli society, like Breaking the Silence and their allies, who want an end to this and want an agreement and want a ceasefire. The U.S., we need to do more. We need to work with the international community, uplift voices for peace, like Common Defense, Breaking the Silence. We'll throw the Quakers in there too. Because a permanent ceasefire will protect civilians in Gaza, including 1 million kids. A permanent ceasefire will help all aid workers alleviate this horrible humanitarian crisis. A permanent ceasefire will get all the hostages home. A permanent ceasefire will de-escalate the Middle East. And a permanent ceasefire will reduce the rampant spread of hate in the form of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Palestinian racism. So often you hear people talking about the day after. Many of these ideas omit Palestinian hopes and dreams for their own future. And while the challenges are immense, I'm heartened by 5,000 veterans signing a petition calling for things that FCNL totally agrees with. We need to end U.S. complicity in this, push for the humanitarian access, restore UNRWA funding, get the hostages home, and finally secure a ceasefire deal. And as I left on the long plane ride home, the urgency of the mission was clear. The Gaza war must end, and I look forward to working with Common Defense and breaking the silence and the majority of Americans that want a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, son. And our final speaker today, say the best for last, is Nadav Wyman, the Executive Director of Breaking the Silence.
Hello everyone. My name is Nadav Wyman. I'm the Executive Director of Breaking the Silence. We're an organization of ex-soldiers in the IDF that fought in the West Bank and Gaza. And we have one thing in common, all of us. We are against the Israeli occupation. We, the soldiers that stood in checkpoints, that raided homes, that arrested kids, that patrolled Palestinian villages, that fought in Gaza, we know more than anyone else why we need to end the Israeli occupation for the sake of the Israeli society and the Palestinian society as well. We cannot really be a democracy in the Middle East if we continue our continuous 57 years of military occupation over the Palestinian people. On the morning of October 7th, me, my wife, and my kids, we ran to the shelter, like a lot of Israelis. And while we're sitting over there, hearing the missiles explode above Tel Aviv, we started getting reports about what is happening around the Gaza border. The Hamas atrocities of October 7th was the most severe attacks that Israeli civilians experienced since 1948. And after a couple of hours, I started calling to all of our activists and donors and supporters in the Gaza envelope. And all of them answered but one, a very good friend of mine, actually my officer from the Special Forces unit where I serve, and my mentor in Breaking the Silence, the guy that brought me to be a political activist. And unfortunately he died, and while he defended his family and his kibbutz, he fought for 7 hours until he ran out of ammunition, and then they killed him. And as an Israeli, that minute I understood that Israel has the right to defend Israelis and to defend our borders. And we have the obligation to defend Israeli citizens, the abducted Israelis inside the Gaza Strip, but also Israelis inside Israel. And while we have the right to defend ourselves, what we are seeing now in Gaza, this is not the way, as an Israeli, I want our army to act. I fought in Gaza in 2008. I was a soldier in a sniper's team in a reconnaissance unit of the Nahal Infantry Brigade. And in 2008, when I fought in Gaza, when we were sent over there for the first time, I was amazed. Because I saw the Gaza Strip from inside in the first time of my life. You have to understand, Israelis, we don't see Gaza. We don't see the streets of Gaza. We don't see Gazans. We don't hear about what is happening inside Gaza. There's an iron curtain between proper Israel and the Gaza Strip. And when we got inside, me and my unit, we cut the fence, we walked in the middle of the night, and we reached to a couple of houses in the outskirts of Gaza City. And we took over the house to do a sniper's ambush from inside the house. And while getting inside, we saw a quite empty house. There wasn't a lot of things inside, which was quite confusing as a soldier, because every night, every raid that we did in the West Bank, houses over there looked like my house in Tel Aviv. But then in Gaza we saw poverty, a lot of it. And when we got on the roof and put our sniping rifles, and as the spotter of the team, I started to scan the area, we noticed there are greenhouses just next to the house that we didn't saw in the aerial photograph that they gave us. So we called a D9 bulldozer that came quickly and demolished everything around us, because our line of sight was more important than anything else in that operation. And the goal in that operation was to create an atmosphere where Palestinians would attack us, and us, as IDF soldiers and snipers, can shoot them back. Although Gilad Shalit, a former Israeli soldier, was abducted in Gaza back then, It wasn't an operation to free him or anything else. It was the day-to-day routine of the Israeli occupation. Yes, in the West Bank we have checkpoints, we have settlers, we have raids, but in Gaza, every couple of years, we have a very big operation where the IDF kills a lot of Palestinians, and a lot of soldiers die as well. And we're sieging Gaza since 2007, from the air, from the sea. And although the Israeli occupation looks differently in Gaza and the West Bank, it is a part of the Israeli occupation. Now, none of the above can explain to us what happened on October 7th, right? Because Israeli citizens were murdered and kidnapped by their hundreds into the Gaza Strip. More than 1,200 Israelis died on October 7th. But we're here today with our friends, with Common Defense, calling for a ceasefire. And we need a ceasefire because we need to release our hostages, because we need to enter humanitarian aid inside, because we need to renew support of UNRWA inside Gaza. And we need to do that for the Palestinian people and for the Israeli people. I was so happy that our friends from Common Defense approached us and offered this shared project. Because veterans, Israelis and Americans, we know more than anyone else how important it is to stop a marching army into one of the most densest areas in planet Earth. And the casualties that we're seeing, Israeli soldiers and Palestinians, are because this is how the IDF fights. This is how I fight in the IDF. It is almost the same commands that I got when I fought in 2008. Soldiers coming to us now, telling us what they did inside Gaza, the magnitude is a lot bigger, but it sounds just like me talking more than 10 years ago about what I did in my army service. And for us, this is our forever war, the Israeli occupation. And just like Israel, we need our friends, our allies around the world helping us to reach to a peace agreement with the Egyptians or with the Jordanians in the 70s and the 90s. We need our friends from Common Defense to come and shake us up and say, no, this is your forever war. And we're here together calling to the American administration, but also to the Israeli government for a ceasefire and releasing our hostages. And I'm thrilled to be over here in Washington with our partners doing this amazing work together, because our voices combined are more powerful than I can ever imagine. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. So that concludes the kind of scheduled part of the press conference. We've got some time for questions. I'm Jake Thompson, Communications Director with Common Defense. And yeah.
I have a question for.
Oh yeah, can we have all the speakers come up again? We can cycle us out.
Thank you. How much do you think voices like your organization or the anti-war, anti-Netanyahu war cabinet camp is heard outside of Israel, especially here in Washington? You know, you're here now. Benjamin Netanyahu is also in town. He's going to be speaking with Congress. How much influence do you think these voices, the anti-war voices, the families of hostages who are opposed to the war strategy, do you feel like you're making a difference? Is there influence or? And maybe also the view from Washington. Do you feel like they're being heard in the Congress?
Okay, so first of all, for your question, I don't care if there's an impact of what I'm doing, because if the other option is to be silent, no, I'm finished with that. But I can say that yes, there's an impact, because Bibi doesn't represent me, and he doesn't represent the majority of people in Israel that go by their thousands every week to protest, to end the war and release our hostages. And I think it's something crucial to be heard over here. Yes, there's lots of protests that are going to happen tomorrow, and there's lots of events that are happening. But I think more than anything else, Americans over here in the international community understand more and more that Benjamin Netanyahu is representing his own political interests, not the Israeli interests. And you know, shared project like this only amplify those voices. So if you want to talk about political impact, let's wait 48 hours and let's see what will happen. But again, the fact that we're over here and it's the first time that we're doing things like that, I think it's only the beginning for amplifying those voices.
I think the question really gets at what is our theory of change? Like, why are we doing this and why do we think it's going to have an impact on decision makers? You know, I will say that in the experience of common defense, ending the war in Afghanistan seemed like an insurmountable task, right? But we as veterans, especially those of us who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, understood that the voices of veterans who have that experience can have an impact on the decision making of elected officials. Our strategy back then was to target the folks who were in the toughest congressional districts, right? So what we call the NatSec Dems. We started with them because we understood if we can get them to come out publicly in favor of ending the war, that would create political coverage for other elected officials to come out for it. And I'm proud to say that those efforts led to President Biden giving a speech where he said, it's time to end the forever war, which was exactly our messaging from the beginning, right? So a small group of veterans, relatively small group of veterans, have an outsized impact when it comes to political discourse in this country, when it comes to public opinion among just everyday Americans. And I would say that, you know, I don't know of any other veterans organization that's working across international waters to work on the issue of Israel and Palestine, right? When we went there in 2022, it was a life-changing experience. For me personally, and I know for everybody else who was on our small delegation of 8 people, those 8 people came home, told our story to the rest of Common Defense, which is hundreds of thousands of members and supporters. And our organization is ready to push for peace. You know, there have been moments in our history where we have gotten close to what was hopefully going to look like a resolution on this question, and then all sorts of things have happened to block that, both in the US, in Israel, and, you know, just the difficult tensions between the two countries. But I think that just because peace is hard to achieve doesn't mean that we, you know, we'll stop trying for it. And I think, you know, as Nadav said, other than the civilians who are on the receiving end of those bombs, veterans are the ones who can speak most potently about what the impact of war is on the civilian population, on the military population, and I think those voices carry a lot of weight when it comes to decision makers.
Any other questions?
Linda Pence-Gunter with Capitol Hill Citizen. This is really addressed mostly to those of you who have fought in conflicts elsewhere and also in Gaza. Since you're familiar with that environment and also with the hardware that's being used in Gaza, I wondered how you feel about my publisher Ralph Nader's contention that actually the casualties are a lot higher than 34,000. We have to go with the official figure that the Gaza authorities release, who've also said that they can't necessarily do an accurate count. But do you feel, from your own personal experience, looking at all the conditions and all the factors in play, whether in fact that's arguably true? I mean, he talks about 200,000, but you know, even if it's more than 34, you know, how do you feel about that particular goal?
Would love to have you field this, but I'll say, you know, what we know about war, period, is that the numbers are always undercounted, and that also highlights the point of why we should have international bodies in there ensuring that we have the most accurate counts that we can. And by the Israeli government not allowing international observers in, we can't do that, right? So.
Yeah, so using different munitions in Gaza is something that our testifiers are talking a lot about. But more than that is collateral damage. Now, we know that the international law allows you to calculate collateral damage if it's a military target, right? And if it serves a purpose. Now, a couple of years ago, in 2008, or even before that, when we did targeted killing Israel from the air, so collateral damage of 14 or 15 individuals, civilians dying with the target was a scandal in Israel. When we fired the Tzal Shahada from the air in Gaza, it was 14 casualties, and it was all over the news, and it sparked a political debate. But now, we're seeing collateral damage of sometimes 3 digits of collateral damage in this war. and the conversation is not where I want it to be, right? And our testifiers are talking about lowering the ranks of people that we can shoot from the air using very big bombs, but also considering collateral damage as something that is almost okay. And me, personally, as a soldier that fought over there, I don't think it's okay, right? I don't think civilians should die, period. Not Israelis and not Palestinians, right? So for a question about numbers, I think behind that there is the question of how a standard army fights inside a populated area. And what I know about the Israeli army, that's an investigation about that, is that when the IDF enters into one of the cities or villages or towns inside the Gaza Strip, so before that we throw leaflets from the air calling all of the Gazans over there to go from this street to that street in that time or that time. And after that, our soldiers are getting a command that there isn't any civilians in those neighborhoods. And because of that, the orders that foot soldiers with M4s, M16s on the ground are getting is that every man military age shoot to kill. Now, what does it mean military age? 16, 17, 18, 19, 50, 55, right? And I don't think that every civilian in front of me, every human being in front of me is a suspected terrorist. I need to see weapons, I need to see intention, right? And those kinds of commands are leading to greater numbers of Palestinian casualties. Now, again, we have to try to defend ourselves. We need to fight the people that want to kill our civilians. But the question is how, right? And this is exactly what we're talking about in Breaking the Silence, right? We're trying to shed a light of what is going on over there so people can resist it. So again, for your question, we would know, I'm guessing months or maybe years from now, the exact number of Palestinian casualties.
You know, yeah, briefly, I'm sorry. I would recommend people check out the Lancet study. It shows that if you include indirect deaths as a result of famine, disease, starvation, that they're estimating it's 186,000. It's a really detailed report and study. And just briefly on what Nagar said, I think we need to be in the business of planting seeds, even if we don't know the shade of the trees in our own lifetime. And I think it's just so critical that we keep our eye on the prize. I know for a fact that Breaking the Silence, Common Defense are having a huge impact just from the offices we've chatted with. Just this week, it's really making a difference. We now have 100 members of Congress calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. We have 130 plus members calling for conditions on military aid. This is unprecedented for the US Congress and the administration. Is it enough? No, but I know it's having an impact and we need to keep going.
Any other questions?
Can you speak a bit about the partnership between Common Defense and Breaking the Silence?
Yeah, so just before the pandemic, we started having conversations with Breaking the Silence as we had been doing our work to end the war in Afghanistan with the End the Forever War campaign and the pledges we were doing here during the 2020 presidential cycle to get presidential candidates to sign on to a pledge to end the forever war. And through that work, got connected with, at the time, Avner, the former executive director, and started trying to figure out what a partnership could look like and how we could help each other work towards peace in both of our respective lanes. So out of that work, we had been planning and trying to get together and send a delegation over to better understand the facts on the ground in Israel and in the West Bank, Palestine. And then a global pandemic delayed those plans a little bit. But in 2022, we were able to go spend 10 days both in East Jerusalem, throughout the West Bank, to understand the conflict better, to understand the history and the context of it. And in that same space where we were learning from Breaking the Silence and everything, we also did a training on how we do community organizing and that type of work here. So it was a knowledge exchange, and that partnership has continued to flourish throughout the years and only strengthened in the past 6 months. We've also had some webinars and live streams, both with our members and their members, to talk about these issues and help bring that forward to light.
just add something to that as well. I think it's important to also note that while the stories of veterans have a tremendous impact on decision makers, I have to say that it's been incredibly heartening and healing to just speak to other vets who understand what it's like to be in a relatively powerful military institution oppressing another group of people, right? Anybody who's served in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it, that story resonates deeply, right? Being in the difficult moral position of either getting drafted or signing up for whatever reason to join the military, thinking that you're doing a good thing, and then being deployed into a situation where every day you're faced with these moral quandaries, right? Of like, I have to do my job, I have to protect the people to my left and right, but I also see the humanity of the people on the other side of the barrel of my gun. I mean, that is, you know, it's such a like profound experience to speak to other vets from a completely different context, right? But in many ways, and probably because we give so much military aid to Israelis, there's just so many parallels that I see there. It's also worth noting that, you know, veterans serving their country and then coming home and getting involved in social change is a history that goes all the way back, certainly in the United States, to Harriet Tubman, and maybe even further, right? So like what we do in Common Defense, and I would argue what folks in Breaking the Silence do, is in the best tradition of those of us who have served in the military. Some of us have served in combat, to take that experience and then transform it into something positive, because we know all the stereotypes about veterans, right? Substance abuse, homelessness, you know, domestic violence, you name it, right? We're all often find ourselves on the wrong end of all the statistics, right? And to find fellow vets who have shared in that pain, but also want to take that pain and turn it into something positive is incredible. So we feel like almost immediate connection when we met Avner, and then when we met the rest of his team and the rest of the staff, it was just like, we just felt like we were in the right place. You know, it was like we have that camaraderie. We served in completely different militaries, completely different contexts, probably wearing the same uniforms and weapons because of our aid to Israel. But I think that, you know, there's a brotherhood, there's a sisterhood there of anybody who served in the military, who put their life in danger. And I would say having to serve under an administration that you don't agree with, right? Like, how many vets have said to themselves, this is not what I signed up for, to invade Iraq, right? Like, we had no reason going into Iraq. And I would argue the reasons going into Afghanistan were pretty dubious as well. And we saw that after 20 years, we had zero impact on that country. And so I think that, you know, I know that the Israeli people prior to October 7th were in upheaval against Netanyahu's government, right? And we're in upheaval about what's happening with the Supreme Court in Israel, right? So we identify with that desire to use our voices as veterans to try and make an impact on those who make decisions and who shape the entire society of like where we're spending our resources, right? There's so much that's invested in the settlements in Israel, right? And as Nadav said, that story is not told to everyday, you know, Israeli people, right? You could live in Tel Aviv, which is really not that far from Gaza, and have no idea of what's going on the other side of the fence. Essentially, the military completely pulled out of Gaza, and now we see the sort of aftermath of that. So I will just say that, you know, working with fellow vets has just been tremendously rewarding, and I think that we're going to see the impact of this work going forward.
Thank you for your service.
And thank you all for joining us. Any other last questions? Yeah.
So I do have one more.
Yeah, of course.
Jonathan, I wondered if you could expound a little bit more on the racism angle, because, I mean, obviously when you go back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki right away, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, now Palestinians in Gaza, there's a common thread there. And I don't know if it's premature to ask you about Kamala Harris, whether you've had any interaction with her yet or before.
We're hoping to.
And, you know, hopefully this will all be over by the time she's president, but it's a possibility that it could still be going on. So I just, it's a little bit vague, but I just wanted to see if you had some more thoughts on that through thread of this story, and also
Yeah.
going forward, you know, how you push back against it.
Yeah, I think what I'll say just for myself is I was on the delegation that went to Israel, Palestine in 2022. And what I saw there in the treatment of the Palestinian people is what I feel like me as a Black woman, you know, experience every day. Just the disenfranchisement, just the dehumanization, and just the feeling less than. We were able to sit in homes of Palestinian folks, and I know, like, before going there, outside of the work that I do with Common Defense, just growing up, my perception of Israel and what was going on there with the occupation was vastly different from what I saw in person. So like Jose said, came back completely transformed, and just filling out, like, as a Black woman and as a mother, that I needed to do, for me, everything possible to make sure that people that are Black and brown like me, people see them. They see them, they hear them, and they, you know, we do everything we can to maintain their dignity. And, you know, it's a fight, and, you know, our organization is working really tirelessly and hard to figure out what that threat is and figure out how we can break that. And so I just, I mean, as a Black woman, as a mother, this will be my daughter's first time. She turns 18 in September, and her first time ever voting in an election, and I'm incredibly proud of the fact that this will be the first time that she's voting, but also her first time voting, she's going to be able to vote for a Black woman. And so I think for me, I look at it through a bunch of different, look at this situation through a bunch of different lenses, as a mother, as a Black woman, as a veteran, as a disabled veteran, as someone who has, you know, worked really tirelessly with the folks at Breaking the Silence. I'm also a part of, like, the training team, so part of the team that, you know, taught them how to move from activism to organizing as well. So, you know, we are doing everything that we can to figure out how we can make this world a better place for everybody. And, you know, really, again, to highlight the humanity of the Palestinian people. They are people, they're like us, and, you know, they deserve the right to live in peace and, you know, just to have the whole love of the world. So, yeah.
Just quickly want to say that I think all war requires dehumanization. And certainly in the case of the US military in Afghanistan or Iraq, or Israelis in Gaza and Palestine, one of the things that was very clear to me while we were in the West Bank was how Palestinians on a daily basis get dehumanized, right? Whether it's restricting their movement on the streets, not letting them walk on certain streets, and welding the doors shut so that they can't exit that side of the building. Just getting from one place to another, whether to get groceries, to access their farms, whether to work in jobs in parts of Jerusalem. It's just, you know, many people have thrown around the word apartheid. I don't know what other word best fits the situation that I saw with my own eyes, right? Of just, like, in every way being segregated out from being anywhere near Israelis. The only Israelis they interact with are people in uniform, right? In certain sections of the West Bank. And so I think that that's a big part of why it's important for us to speak up, right? That, like, those of us that are here, and I know many, many other members of Common Defense and Breaking the Silence, understand that, like, the first step in taking action is, like, rejecting this narrative that the people on the other side are somehow less than human, and that they're inherently the enemy, right? Every faith tradition teaches us, right, that we are all God's people. And the only way you can get to a point where you're able to pull the trigger or able to detain somebody and put them in flex cuffs is because you have been fed a narrative about the inherent danger that everyday people, including children, right? Like, when we were there, we saw that Palestinian children going from their elementary school to home had to face being not only taunted, but, like, rocks thrown and sometimes physical altercations with little children, like 7-year-old kids, just walking home from school, to their homes. And unfortunately, the orders that the IDF soldiers receive is that they're hands off when it comes to the settlers, right? So essentially, you've got these people that are bullying children, and the one authority in the space who could do something about it are ordered to not do anything about it. That requires a level of dehumanization and a vision that Netanyahu and his administration are trying to push forward, which essentially is, we are going to push these people back and limit their access to land, right? They've got an idea of how they want to continue to take more and more land away from Palestinian people to the point where they're completely fragmented from each other, fragmented from their ability to, or separated from their ability to just make a living and like access water and some of the basic things. So this is all before October 7th, right? This has nothing to do with like the current situation. This was just the everyday reality of the occupation. And I think that we reject that. We reject it, out of hand. And that is not the starting place, right? We have to have a vision of what the future looks like. We have to have leaders who have a vision of what a future looks like that doesn't require Israelis to, on a daily basis, dehumanize and occupy the Palestinian people. So it starts with a ceasefire, but it's a much bigger project and vision for that.
Yeah, so I can say that as an Israeli, before doing this, I was a high school teacher for literature and history, and I worked in a shelter for kids in Tel Aviv. So in every classroom in Israel, there's a map next to the board, but the map is without the green line, and without any names of Palestinian villages or towns. Between the river to the sea, it's only Israel. Right? So this is what you see, what you're standing in a class, sitting in a classroom for 12 years in Israel. Just before coming over here, I had a lecture in Tel Aviv for 18-year-olds in a high school. And they asked me to explain to them, what is the Gaza Strip? Who lives over there? What's going on over there? And because we don't have any idea. Right? It's Israelis that are growing up in Israel. I grew up in Tel Aviv. I had friends from Jaffa. I thought they were Arabs. I didn't understand they were Palestinians. Right? Because nobody is talking with us about it. And again, as a history teacher, I can go on and on how we teach our kids in our history books. But we don't speak the language. We don't speak Arabic. I didn't study Arabic in high school. So we live in different cities or different towns. We listen to different frequencies on the radio, different textbooks. Everything is different. The first time I met Palestinians in my life is as a combat soldier in Jenin in 2006, after finishing my training in the Special Forces. Right? And it was from two sides of a barrel of a gun. That's my first encounter with Palestinians. It was a kid that I dragged from his bed in the middle of the night after we break down the door and took his house as a sniper's ambush, as a place to do a sniper's ambush. That was the first time I interacted with Palestinians. And I think that racism, or even more than that, that separation between us and Palestinians, that what allows a lot of us to be, just as Jose said a minute ago, to be combat soldiers in a checkpoint or in house raids or attacking Gaza or all of that. And it's not only education. It's in the West Bank we have two separate law systems. We have the Israeli criminal law system for settlers, and we have the Israeli military law system for Palestinians. Two different law systems in the same piece of land, and it depends on nationality, right? If you're Palestinian or not. And the Israeli law system, the Israeli criminal law system, basically lets settlers do whatever they want, because we as IDF soldiers, we don't have the ability to arrest violent settlers. This is what they tell us. On protocol, black over white, it says we have. But we get a command that we cannot do it. Right? Yesterday we had an attack in the South Lebanon Hills area. This morning I got the videos. And I saw settlers with metal clubs with spikes on the edge of it, beating Palestinians, sending 3 of them to the hospital. One of them, a 38-year-old woman with a broken skull. Next to them, in the same video, you can see 2 soldiers protecting them. And what the soldier did, they shot in the air the minute Palestinians tried to defend themselves. And eventually what happens in those circumstances, Palestinians are getting arrested in the end. Why? Because they tell us as soldiers, we are over there to protect Israelis. We are over there to protect the settlements. And this is protecting Israel. Now we'll break in a silence and say, no, that's not true. It's not protecting Israel. It's protecting our control on Palestinians. Mm-hmm. It's protecting the settler enterprise. It's not protecting Israel. Protecting Israel is being on the borders, the 1967 borders. This is protecting Israel. So not seeing Palestinians as people that are just like me, have ambitions and dreams and kids, and they're afraid and they're happy and I don't know what. Only see them as an enemy helps us with the 57 years of occupation. And what we saw now after this war started on Gaza, we saw that government officials, MKs, ministers in our government, religious leaders are using the dog whistle, Amalek. Amalek, it's a biblical name for our arch enemy of the Jewish people, right? We had Xerxes, and we had Hitler, and now Amalek, the Palestinians are called Amalek. And you can hear it, you can see it in videos that soldiers are uploading from the Gaza Strip to social media. And again, you can hear ministers from our government using that word, right? And that helps IDF soldiers to feel comfortable of shooting inside Gaza, of operating like they're doing, but also what we are seeing, looting in Gaza, and also demolishing Palestinian homes over there. Some of them is by command, yes. We have commands in the IDF to demolish homes after we leave them inside Gaza. But some of them is just, I think, because of, I don't know, hatred, racism, I don't know what. So it's based in how we grow up in Israel. It's based on our political system, right? We have different parties. And it's very much based on the rule of law between us and Palestinians for the past 57 years.
I think with that, we will close out. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll send out the press release to all of you as well, and to anybody else who couldn't make it, but feel free to chat with anybody after. Thank you.